Check, check. I am checking my microphone. Check, check. Wow. That is a lot of latency, but nonetheless, I am checking my microphone. It does sound pretty good. Okay. Hello and welcome to the stream. My name is Chris Poor, and today I'm going to be mainly reading the Wikipedia page for the IPCC, which is a UN entity that studies climate change. If you don't understand why I'm doing this, then I would recommend you check out my introductory video, or I will have a link to a Google Doc that I created that kind of explains my impetus for this streaming series. So yeah, otherwise, if you understand why I'm doing this and what I'm getting into, I will proceed. Okay, so yeah, as I said, I am just going to be reading the Wikipedia page for the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So yeah, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, is an intergovernmental body of the United Nations. Its job is to advance scientific knowledge about climate change caused by human activities. The World Meteorological Organization, WMO, and the United Nations Environment Programme, UNEP, established the IPCC in 1988. The United Nations endorsed the creation of the IPCC later that year. It has a secretariat in Geneva, Switzerland, hosted by the WMO. It has 195 member states who govern the IPCC. The member states elect a Bureau of Scientists to serve through an assessment cycle. A cycle is usually 6 to 7 years. The Bureau selects experts to prepare IPCC reports. It draws the experts from nominations by governments and observer organizations. The IPCC has 3 working groups and a task force, which carry out its scientific work. The IPCC informs governments about the state of knowledge of climate change. It does this by examining all of the relevant scientific literature on the subject. This includes the natural, economic, and social impacts and risks. It also covers possible response options. The IPCC does not conduct its own original research. It aims to be objective and comprehensive. Thousands of scientists and other experts volunteer to review the publications. They compile key findings into assessment reports for policymakers and the general public. Experts have described this work as the biggest peer review process in the scientific community. The IPCC is an internationally accepted authority on climate change. Leading climate scientists and all member governments endorse its findings. Media, governments, civil society organizations, and businesses cite its reports. IPCC reports play a key role in the annual climate negotiations held by the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC. The IPCC Fifth Assessment Report was an important influence on the landmark Paris Agreement in 2015. The IPCC shared the 2007 Nobel Peace Prize with Al Gore for contributions to the understanding of climate change. The IPCC began its 7th assessment cycle in 2023. In August 2021, the IPCC published its Working Group 1 contributions for the 6th assessment report, IPCC AR6. The AR6 is what I will be ultimately reading in this streaming series. On the physical science basis of climate change. The Guardian described this report as the starkest warning yet of major, inevitable, and irreversible climate changes. Many newspapers around the world echoed this theme. In February 2022, the IPCC released its Working Group 2 report on impacts and adaptation. It published Working Group 3's Mitigation of Climate Change contribution to the 6th assessment in April 2022. The 6th assessment report concluded with a synthesis report in March 2023. So I am reading the summary for policymakers of that synthesis report that was released in March of 2023. During the period of the 6th assessment report, the IPCC released 3 special reports. The first and most influential report was the Special Report on Global Warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius in 2018. In 2019, the Special Report on Climate Change and Land, SRCCL, and the Special Report on the Ocean and Cryosphere in Climate Change, SROCC, came out. The IPCC also updated its methodologies in 2019, so the 6th assessment cycle was the most ambitious in the IPCC's history. The predecessor of the IPCC was the Advisory Group on Greenhouse Gases, AGGG. A lot of acronyms here. 3 organizations set up the AGGG in 1986. These were the International Council of Scientific Unions, the United Nations Environment Program, UNEP, and the World Meteorological Organization, WMO. The AGGG reviewed scientific research on greenhouse gases. It also studied increases in greenhouse gases. Climate science was becoming more complicated and covering more disciplines. This small group of scientists lacked the resources to cover climate science. The United States Environmental Protection Agency sought an international convention to restrict greenhouse gas emissions. The Reagan administration worried that independent scientists would have too much influence. The WMO and UNEP therefore created the IPCC as an intergovernmental body in 1988. Scientists take part in the IPCC as both experts and government representatives. The IPCC produces reports backed by all leading relevant scientists. Member governments must also endorse the reports by consensus agreement. So, the IPCC is both a scientific body and an organization of governments. Its job is to tell governments what scientists know about climate change. It also examines the impacts of climate change and options for dealing with it. The IPCC does this by assessing peer-reviewed scientific literature. The United Nations endorsed the creation of the IPCC in 1988. The General Assembly resolution noted that human activity could change the climate. This could lead to severe economic and social consequences. It said increasing concentrations of greenhouse gases could warm the planet. This would cause the sea level to rise. The effects for humanity would be disastrous if timely steps were not taken. Next section is about the organization of the IPCC. The IPCC does not conduct original research. It produces comprehensive assessments on the state of knowledge of climate change. It prepares reports on special topics relevant to climate change. It also produces methodologies. These methodologies help countries estimate their greenhouse gas emissions and removals through sinks. Its assessments build on previous reports and scientific publications. Over the course of 6 assessments, the reports reflect the growing evidence for a changing climate, and they show how this is due to human activity. The IPCC has adopted its rules of procedure in the principles governing IPCC work. These state that the IPCC will assess, number 1, the risk of climate change caused by human activities, number 2, its potential impacts, and number 3, possible options for prevention. Under IPCC rules, its assessments are comprehensive, objective, open, and transparent. They cover all the information relevant to the scientific understanding of climate change. This draws on scientific, technical, socioeconomic information. IPCC reports must be neutral regarding policy recommendations. However, they may address the objective factors relevant to enacting policies. The IPCC has the following structure. There's the IPCC panel that meets in a plenary session about twice a year. I actually don't know what that is, so I'm looking it up right now. A session of a conference or deliberative assembly in which all parties or members are present. Okay. It may meet more often for the approval of reports. It controls the IPCC's structure, procedures, work program, and budget. It accepts and approves IPCC reports. The panel is the IPCC corporate entity. There's a chair. The chair is elected by the panel. The chair chairs the bureau and other bodies. It represents the organization. And there's the bureau. The bureau is elected by the panel. It currently has 34 members from different geographic regions. Besides the chair and 3 IPCC vice chairs, they provide the leadership for the IPCC's 3 working groups and task force. The bureau provides guidance to the panel on the scientific and technical aspects of its work. Then there are the working groups. Each working group has 2 co-chairs, one for a developed and one for a developing country. A technical support unit supports each working group. Working group sessions approve the summary for policymakers of assessment and special reports. Each working group has a bureau. This consists of its co-chairs and vice chairs, who are also members of the IPCC Bureau. The working groups are as follows. Working Group 1 assesses scientific aspects of the climate system and climate change. Working Group 2 assesses the impacts of climate change on human and natural systems. And Working Group 3 assesses how to stop climate change by limiting greenhouse gas emissions. And then there is a task force on national greenhouse gas inventories, which develops methodologies for estimating greenhouse gas emissions. And then there's an executive committee that consists of the chair, IPCC vice chairs, and co-chairs of the working groups and task force. It addresses urgent issues that arise between sessions of the panel. And then there's a secretariat that administers activities and supports the chair and bureau and others. I'm actually going to skip talking about the chair and the panel because I think... Actually, no, I should at least read about the panel. The panel consists, because I think this is important, the panel consists of representatives appointed by governments. They take part in plenary sessions of the IPCC and its working groups. Non-governmental and intergovernmental organizations may attend as observers. Meetings of IPCC bodies are by invitation only. About 500 people from 130 countries attend the 48th session of the panel in Incheon, Republic of Korea. Excuse my mispronunciation. Funding. The IPCC receives funding through a dedicated trust fund. UNEP and the WMO established the fund in 1989. The trust fund receives annual financial contributions from member governments. The WMO, UNEP, and other organizations also contribute. Payments are voluntary, and there is no set amount required. The WMO covers the operating costs of the Secretariat. It also sets the IPCC's financial regulations and rules. The panel sets the annual budget. In 2021, the IPCC's annual budget amounts to approximately 6 million euros, financed by the 195 UN member states, who contribute independently and voluntarily. In 2021, the countries giving the most money include the United States, Japan, France, Germany, and Norway. Other countries, often developing ones, give an in-kind contribution by hosting IPCC meetings. In 2022, this budget was a little less than 8 million euros. I'd be very curious to know exactly how much the United States contributed. But, if you're talking about 8 million euros split between potentially all the UN member states, it could be very small. I mean, $8 million of federal money is peanuts to begin with. The next section of this article lists basically all of the reports. Obviously, I'm not going to read it, but just to point out, the first AR assessment report was in 1990. That's the year I was born. That's been a while from now, and there's been 6 reports since then. And yeah, as I've said, 2023, they released the AR6 synthesis report, which is what I'm reading the summary for Policymakers in this streaming series. Activities other than report preparation. The IPCC bases its work on the decisions of the WMO and UNEP, which established the IPCC. It also supports the work of the UNFCCC. The main work of the IPCC is to prepare assessment and other reports. It also supports other activities such as the Data Distribution Center. This helps manage data related to IPCC reports. The IPCC has a gender policy and implementation plan to pay attention to gender in its work. It aims to carry out its work in an inclusive and respectful manner. The IPCC aims for balance and participation in IPCC work. This should offer all participants equal opportunity. Communications and dissemination activities. The IPCC enhanced its communications activities for the fifth assessment report. For instance, it made the approved report and press release available to registered media under embargo before the release. And it expanded its outreach activities with an outreach calendar. The IPCC held an expert meeting on communication in February 2016 at the start of the sixth assessment report cycle. Members of the old and new bureaus worked with communications experts and practitioners at this meeting. This meeting was produced as a series of recommendations. The IPCC adopted many of them. One was to bring people with communications expertise into the working group technical support units. Another was to consider communications questions early on in preparation of reports. Following these steps in communications, the IPCC saw a significant increase in media coverage of its reports. This was particularly the case with the special report on global warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius in 2018 and climate change 2021, the physical science basis. The working group contribution to the sixth assessment report in 2021. There was also much greater public interest reflected in the youth and other movements that emerged in 2018. IPCC reports are important for public awareness of climate change and related policymaking. This has led a number of academic studies of IPCC communications, for example, in 2021. So yes, it is my opinion that these reports are very important, and everybody should at least have an idea that, they should see these reports as indeed humanity's understanding of climate change, because obviously, we are inundated with, a study here, a study there, and many people, often politicians, will say, well, look at this study that said something different from that study. These people don't know what they're talking about. But the IPCC reports are a synthesis of all of these studies, right? So I think that, if we're going to be talking about studies in public and in politics, then, we really ought to mainly be talking about the IPCC reports. So I think it's very important that people be more aware of these reports and what they are. Okay, some information about the assessment reports. Between 1990 and 2023, the IPCC has published 6 comprehensive assessment reports reviewing the latest climate science. The IPCC has also produced 14 special reports on particular topics. Each assessment report has 4 parts. These are a contribution from each of the 3 working groups plus a synthesis report. The synthesis report integrates the working group contributions. It also integrates any special reports produced in that assessment cycle. Review process of scientific literature. The IPCC does not carry out its own research. It does not monitor climate-related data. The reports by IPCC assess scientific papers and independent results from other scientific bodies. The IPCC sets a deadline for publication of scientific papers that a report will cover. That report will not include new information that emerges after this deadline. However, there is a steady evolution of key findings and levels of scientific confidence from one assessment report to the next. Each IPCC report notes where the science has improved since the previous report. It also notes areas that would benefit from further research. I think that's an important nuance, actually, because that means that, when the sixth report cycle started, that was many years ago at this point, 5 or 6 years ago. So they would have to stop. So that, in other words, there's a constant lag between these synthesis, or between, each reporting cycle, where they are missing up to the most recent 6 years of scientific studies. But, of course, they say that they do look at those studies to help inform, what they say, but they're not actually part of, the studies that they cite in the reports. Selection and role of authors. The focal points of the member states, the individual appointed by each state to liaise with the IPCC, and the observer organizations submit to the IPCC Bureau a list of personalities which they have freely constituted. The Bureau uses these lists as a basis for approving authors while retaining the possibility of appointing people who are not on the list, primarily on the basis of scientific excellence and diversity of viewpoints, and to a lesser extent by ensuring geographical diversity, experience within the IPCC, and gender. Authors may include, in addition to researchers, personalities from the private sector and experts from NGOs. The IPCC Bureau or Working Group Bureau selects the authors of reports from the government nominations. Lead authors of IPCC reports assess the available information about climate change based on published sources. According to IPCC guidelines, authors should give priority to peer-reviewed sources. Duh. Authors may refer to non-peer-reviewed sources, also called gray literature, if they are of sufficient quality. These could include reports from government agencies and NGOs. Industry journalists and model results are other examples of non-peer-reviewed sources. Interesting. Model results. I wonder why it says that model results would be not peer-reviewed. Maybe what it means is like, if you are running a model, you're not necessarily publishing a paper about that model. You are just, your deliverable as a scientist is the results of the model, but not like a paper that goes along with it. Not sure on that one. Authors prepare drafts of a full report divided into chapters. They also prepare a technical summary of the report and a summary for policymakers. Each chapter has a number of authors to write and edit the material. A typical chapter has 2 coordinating lead authors, 10 to 15 lead authors, and a large number of contributing authors. Possibly a typo there. The coordinating lead authors assemble the contributions of the other authors. They ensure that contributions meet stylistic and formatting requirements. They report to the working group co-chairs. The lead authors write sections of chapters. They invite contributing authors to prepare text, graphs, and data for inclusion. Review editors must ensure that authors respond to comments received during the 2 stages of draft reviews. The first is only open to external experts in research, while the second is open to government representatives. So once again, the governments are sending representatives to review these reports as editors. The Bureau aims for a range of views, expertise, and geographical representation in its choice of authors. This ensures the author team includes experts from both developing and developed countries. The Bureau also seeks a balance between male and female authors, and it aims for a balance between those who have worked previously on IPCC reports and those new to the process. Scientists work as authors on the IPCC reports, do not receive any contribution for this work, and all work on a voluntary basis. Once again, I think this is a critical point that it's worth just reiterating, that, often a charge against the UN is, that they're just lining their own pockets, and, or rather, the charge against scientists is that they're somehow benefiting, from saying things that, like, the UN wants them to say. But yeah, here we have it. That is not the case, or at least it's not the case that money is flowing from the IPCC to climate scientists. The scientists, as it says, depend on the salaries they receive from their home institutions or other work. So the work is labor intensive with a big time commitment, and it can disrupt participating scientists' research. This has led to concerns that the IPCC process may discourage qualified scientists from participating. More than 3,000 authors have participated in drafting of IPCC reports since its creation. So yeah, I don't know about you, but adding more work to my work is usually, for no extra pay, is usually not something that I'm super open to. Okay, a section about the review process for assessment reports. Expert reviewers comment at different stages of the drafts. Reviewers come from member governments and IPCC observers. Also, anyone may become an IPCC reviewer by stating they have the relevant experience. There are generally 3 stages in the review process. First comes expert review for the first draft of the chapters. The next stage is a review by governments and experts of the revised draft of the chapters and the first draft of the summary for policymakers. The third stage is a government review of the revised summary for policymakers. Review, comments, and author responses remain in an open archive for at least 5 years. Finally, government representatives, together with the authors, review the summary for policymakers. They go through the summary for policymakers line by line to ensure it is a good summary for the underlying report. This final review of the summary for policymakers takes place at sessions of the responsible working group of the panel. There are several types of endorsement which documents receive. Number 1 is approval. Material has been subject to detailed line-by-line discussion and agreement. Number 2 is adoption, endorsed section by section, not line by line. Number 3 is acceptance, not been subjected to line-by-line discussion and agreement, but it represents a comprehensive, objective, and balanced view of the subject matter. So, this section right here is precisely why I am reading the summary for policymakers of the synthesis report of the AR6 report. And it's because, as I just read, it is vetted and approved by government entities. And I think that this is really just an extremely high level of, vetting of the content of the report. I believe somewhere in here it mentions this, but the fact of the matter is that it is such a high level of vetting that the reality is that it's probably warping the summary for policymakers toward the end of being too conservative, because you have all these different governments with all these different, unique interests that are, putting their thumb on the scale. So it probably is watering down the reports a bit, and by that I explicitly mean making climate change not seem as bad as the scientific research itself would, if you were to, just conglomerate that without government review. Okay, key findings and impacts. Assessment reports 1 to 5, 1990 to 2014. The first assessment report appeared in 1990. The report gave a broad overview of climate change science. It discussed uncertainties and provided evidence of warming. The authors said they are certain that greenhouse gases are increasing the atmosphere because of human activity. This is resulting in more warming of Earth's surface. The report led to the establishment of the UNFCCC. The second assessment report was published in 1995. It strengthened the finding of the first assessment report. The evidence suggests that there is discernible human influence on the global climate, it said. The second assessment report provided important material for negotiations leading to the IPCC's Kyoto Protocol. As a reminder, Kyoto Protocol was an international treaty which extended the 1992 UNFCCC that commits state parties to reduce greenhouse gas emissions based on scientific consensus that global climate change is real. The third assessment report was completed in 2001. It found more evidence that most of the global warming seen over the previous 50 years was due to human activity. The report includes a graph reconstructing global temperatures since the year 1000. The sharp rise in temperatures in recent years gave it the name hockey stick. This became a powerful image of how temperature is soaring with climate change. The report also shows how adaptation to the effects of climate change can reduce some of its ill effects. So yeah, this is if you can see this image, the infamous hockey stick graph from the third assessment report, 2001. The IPCC's fourth assessment report was published in 2007. It gives much greater certainty about climate change. It states, warming of the climate system is unequivocal. The report helped make people around the world aware of climate change. The IPCC shared the Nobel Peace Prize in the year of the report's publication for this work. This is around the time when I really started to become more interested in climate change and more concerned. Probably right around 2008 or 9, maybe 2010 is when climate change took the top position on my list of like voting priorities. And yeah, it's stayed there ever since. The fifth assessment report was published in 2013 and 2014. This report again stated the fact of climate change. It warned of the dangerous risks, and it emphasized how the world can counter climate change. Three key findings were, for example, firstly, human influence on the climate system is clear. Secondly, the more we disrupt our climate, the more we risk severe, pervasive, and irreversible impacts. And thirdly, we have the means to limit climate change and build a more prosperous and sustainable future. The report's findings were the scientific foundation of the UNFCCC's 2015 Paris Agreement. Specific to the sixth assessment report, the IPCC's most recent report is the sixth assessment report. The three installments of AR6 appeared in 2021 and 2022. The final synthesis report was completed in March 2023. The IPCC published the Working Group 1 report, Climate Change 2021, the Physical Science Basis, in August 2021. It confirms that the climate is already changing in every region. Many of these changes have not been seen in thousands of years. Many of them, such as sea level rise, are irreversible over hundreds of thousands of years. Strong reductions in greenhouse gas emissions would limit climate change, but it could take 20 to 30 years for the climate to stabilize. This report attracted enormous media and public attention. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres described it as code red for humanity. I can just see it now. I'm going to be an old man, and we will have reached net zero, and people out there will be complaining because we were told net zero would fix everything, and the climate is still as bad as ever. Because indeed, it's a very big and it's a system that has a lot of momentum, and even reaching net zero and even reducing CO2 will take a long time to take effect, I imagine. Okay, the IPCC published the Working Group 2 report, Climate Change 2022, Impacts, Adaptation, and Vulnerability, in February 2022. Climate change due to human activities is already affecting the lives of billions of people, it said. It is disrupting nature. The world faces unavoidable hazards over the next 2 decades, even with global warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius, it said. The IPCC published the Working Group 3 report, Climate Change 2022, Mitigation of Climate Change, in April 2022. It will be impossible to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius without immediate and deep cuts in greenhouse gas emissions. It is still possible to have emissions by 2050, it said. I'm trying to decide how much more I should be reading here because, like most people, I have to work. So we have this big section, other reports. I don't know that I really need to talk about the other reports, but I think essentially, well, let me just read this. The IPCC also publishes other types of reports. It produces special reports on topics proposed by governments or observer organizations. Between 1994 and 2019, the IPCC published 14 special reports. Now, usually more than one working group cooperates to produce a special report. The preparation and approval process is the same as for assessment reports. So yeah, assessment reports are kind of like the big ones, the, I guess, Super Bowl of the IPCC. And then they release these, other reports that are whatever, the regular games. I don't know what you would call that in a sports analogy. So yeah, here they're kind of listed and it talks about them. But I don't think I need to go through all of those on this stream. Challenges and controversies. IPCC reports also attract criticism. Criticisms come from both people who say the reports exaggerate the risks and people who say they understate them. The IPCC consensus approach has faced internal and external challenges. Conservative nature of IPCC reports. Some critics have argued that IPCC reports tend to be too conservative in their assessment of climate risk. In 2012, it was reported that the IPCC has been criticized by some scientists who argue that the reports consistently underestimate the pace and impacts of global warming. As a result, they believe this leads to findings that are the lowest common denominator. David Viejo, writing in Scientific American, argues that because the need to secure consensus among government representatives, the IPCC reports give conservative estimates of the likely extent and effects of global warming. Science editor Brooks Hansen states in a 2010 editorial, the IPCC reports have underestimated the pace of climate change while overestimating society's ability to curb greenhouse gas emissions. Climate scientist James Hansen argues that the IPCC's conservativeness seriously underestimates the risk of sea level rise on the order of meters, enough to inundate many low-lying areas such as the southern third of Florida. Roger Pielke Sr. has also stated humans are significantly altering the global climate, but in a variety of diverse ways beyond the radiative effect of carbon dioxide. The IPCC assessments have been too conservative in recognizing the importance of these human climate forcings as they alter regional and global climate. And Stefan Rahmstorf, a professor of physics and oceanography at University of Potsdam, argued in 2007 that the IPCC's tendency to make conservative risk assessments had benefits. Rahmstorf argued that, in a way, it is one of the strengths of the IPCC to be very conservative and cautious and not overstate any climate change risks. IPCC reports aim to inform policymakers about the state of knowledge on climate change. They do this by assessing the findings of thousands of scientific papers available on the subject at any given time. Individual publications may have different conclusions to IPCC reports. This includes those appearing just after the release of an IPCC report. This can lead to criticism that the IPCC is either alarmist or conservative. New findings must wait for the next assessment for consideration. I do wonder if anybody's tried to study the specific claims that the reports make versus the actual observed reality as time goes forward. So in other words, the 1993 or whatever, the AR1, the first assessment report, it makes claims about, what will be happening in the 2010s, and we now know what happened in the 2010s. So it would be interesting to kind of line up that information and see how it compares. For the reasons I mentioned earlier, I think it's very likely that the reports underestimated the effects, and again, as this section points out, also overestimate the extents that people and governments are willing to go to combat climate change. I mean, I think in the 90s, probably nobody saw the U.S. digging its heels in for decades, before passing its first climate bill in 2022. So potential. Oh man, unfortunately, I really need to wrap this up here, but I should definitely get through this section. Potential industry and political influence. A memo by ExxonMobil to the Bush administration in the United States in 2002 was an example of possible political influence on the IPCC. The memo led to a strong Bush administration lobbying to oust Robert Watson, a climate scientist, as IPCC chair. They sought to replace him with Rajendra Pachauri, many consider Pachauri. I apologize for my mispronunciation. At the time, as a more mild-mannered and industry-friendly. Governments form the membership of the IPCC. They are the prime audience for IPCC reports. IPCC rules give them a formal role in the scoping, preparation, and approval of reports. For instance, governments take part in the review process and work with authors to approve the summary for policymakers of reports. But some activists have argued that governments abuse this role to influence the outcome of the reports. In 2023, it was reported that pressure from Brazil and Argentina, two countries with large beef industries, caused the IPCC to abandon text recommending the adoption of plant-based diets. An earlier draft of the report, which noted plant-based diets can reduce greenhouse gas emissions by up to 50% compared to the average emission-intensive Western diet, was leaked online in March 2023. Yeah, that's an interesting point. Let's see. So, okay. The IPCC came under unprecedented media scrutiny in 2009 in the run-up to the Copenhagen Climate Conference. This Climate Research Unit email controversy involved the leak of emails from climate scientists. Many of these scientists were authors of the fourth assessment report, which came out in 2007. The discovery of an error in this report that the Himalayan glaciers would melt by 2035 put the IPCC under further pressure. Scientific bodies upheld the general findings of the fourth assessment report and the IPCC's approach. But many people thought the IPCC should review the way it works. Interesting. I'm not going to read this section. I guess something else happened. Some other controversy is what I assume this is about. Issues with consensual approach. Michael Oppenheimer, a longtime participant in the IPCC, has said the IPCC consensus approach has some limitations. Oppenheimer, a coordinating lead author of the fifth assessment report, called for concurring smaller assessments of special problems instead of the large-scale approach of previous IPCC assessments. Others see mixed blessings in the drive for consensus within the IPCC. They suggest including dissenting or minority positions. Others suggest improving statements about uncertainties. I don't know why you would include any dissenting positions, because you're trying to synthesize all of these studies into a single message. So, and the other fact of the matter is that, you're going to have 10,000 papers, a very small number are going to be dissenting opinions, but even to just put it in there, you're going to be giving more airtime proportionally to something that's incorrect according to all the other papers. Why would you put incorrect stuff in there at all, though? If you have the vast majority of studies saying one thing, I don't know that you would want to even try to. I don't know. It's it seems like a way for them to just cover their butt or something, and not claim to be silencing the voices of the minority or something like that. Okay, criticism by experts involved with the IPCC process. Some of the criticism has originated from experts invited by the IPCC to submit reports or serve on its panels. For example, John Christie, a contributing author who works at the University of Alabama in Huntsville, explained in 2007 the difficulties of establishing scientific consensus on the precise extent of human action on climate change. A quote, contributing authors essentially are asked to contribute a little text at the beginning and to review the first two drafts. We have no control over editing decisions. Even less influence is granted the 2,000 or so reviewers. Thus, to say that 800 contributing authors or 2,000 reviewers reached consensus on anything describes a situation that is not reality, he wrote. Christopher Lancy, a hurricane researcher, that's really his name, Lancy, said of the part of the IPCC to which my expertise is relevant that I personally cannot in good faith continue to contribute to a process that I view as being both motivated by preconceived agendas and being scientifically unsound because of comments made at a press conference by Kevin Trenberth, of which Lancy disapproved. Trenberth said Lancy's comments were not correct. The IPCC replied, individual scientists can do what they wish in their own rights as long as they're not saying anything on behalf of the IPCC. Okay, I guess, yeah, there's some criticisms, but again, I feel like because of the number of parties involved, and again, specifically because of the approval by governments, government representatives, I think that's a very high standard, and obviously it's far higher than a standard that would be, me like going out on Google and downloading a bunch of climate-related studies and trying to read them and parse them. I think the IPCC, I mean, that's their job, is to parse that information and package it in a way that governments agree with. So yeah, there's a couple endorsements and awards here. Nobel Peace Prize in 2007. Another award, Gulbenkian Prize for Humanity in 2022. Not familiar with that. And that is it. So obviously the Wikipedia article includes many sources if you should be interested in checking any of those out. I guess just to run through, I just want to have a couple key takeaways here. Number one, IPCC has been around for a very long time. Governments consider it, the source of knowledge regarding climate change. It synthesizes many thousands, like more than 10,000 scientific peer-reviewed papers to reach its conclusions. It was created by the Reagan administration because evidently they were afraid that independent scientists would have too much influence on the discourse, so they wanted to create a panel that was vetting all of the different scientists' work. And let's see, what else? Obviously, the IPCC is extremely transparent. Its documentation is available publicly. It's not like a shady organization. It only costs whatever, 6 to 8 million euro to operate. Contributions are voluntary. These assessment reports come out every 5 or 6 years. And what else? All right, I think that's all I wanted to cover in this stream. So with a good understanding of what the IPCC is, my next stream really will just dive into the actual reading of the AR6 synthesis report. And I'm not sure how many streams that will take, but I will get through it and probably try to do one every day for maybe the next week or so. So yeah, hope you learned something. Hope you enjoyed this stream and are interested in this series. And either way, I hope you have a wonderful morning, afternoon, or night.